Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Topher Project. My name is Topher Field. This is another interview. Now, Donald Trump is changing the world in lots of really interesting ways. And one of them that I did not expect was the introduction of a website all about the origins of COVID-19. Many people want to say that COVID-19 is ancient news. We're all just moving on now. I'm not one of those people. And those of you who know my story and my connection to Melbourne, Australia, the most locked down city in the world, will know well why it is that I don't really want to let that go. But I went looking for someone who could break down for me the significance not only of this website that Donald Trump has put up, but also the recent revelations out of Victoria confirming what we already knew, which is that Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews did not rely on health advice when it came to imposing his curfew, one of the many, in my opinion, human rights violations that were committed during that time. Well, who better to talk to than the Libertarians? They formerly under the name of the Liberal Democrats. We had two MPs of theirs who were absolute champions in Victoria during the very, very dark times. They were David Limbrick and Tim Quilty. And now with a federal election approaching, I'm going to talk to the Libertarian lead Senate candidate from Victoria, Jordan Ditloff, to get the lowdown on what's going on. Jordan, thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me, mate.
Now, for those who may not be aware of this move by Donald Trump at all, help me to understand what's going on with Donald Trump out of the US. Why is he even doing this? It would have been very easy for him not to talk about this at all, especially given his connection to the warp speed vaccine program, etc. It would have seemed to be in his political interest to just let all of this go, but he certainly has not done that. Do we know why?
No, look, we don't. I mean, I don't think anyone knows really exactly why Donald Trump does anything. But I think if you think back to his first term, to the end of his first term before that 2020 presidential election, which a lot of people say had irregularities and so forth, the way that COVID was weaponized against him and his presidency, especially early in the pandemic, was pretty significant. And I remember his initial response being very critical of China and being very quick to close borders. And he was absolutely lambasted for that. And he was told he was being racist and Orange Man bad. And essentially he ended up backflipping more or less under that pressure and sort of accepting a lot of the Fauci sort of advice. And I think that in a lot of ways for him, I suspect this is a bit of unfinished business and really kind of redeeming and rehabilitating that initial response and some mistakes that were made. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't give Donald Trump credit for, is the fact that I think he is prepared to actually admit when he was wrong and to revisit things that he'd previously said or views he'd held. And I don't view that as a weakness in politicians anywhere. I think a lot of people are very, very quick to say, oh, it's a backflip and, oh, why have you changed your position? And I say, good. Like, more politicians should change their position if the evidence becomes available. And I think admitting you made a mistake is a sign of immense strength, not weakness.
I have to agree. And I just want to jump back to this website here because it is truly extraordinary what he goes through. And your colleague, lead Senate candidate for the Libertarians in New South Wales, Craig Kelly, he was censored online at the behest of the Australian government for making claims and saying things that are actually now confirmed as absolutely true in this website. That it was a lab leak, that the US NIH was involved, that there was an active effort to cover that up, and so much more. It's a truly extraordinary website. There's a couple of things I want to draw out of this before we move on to the Victorian situation. Firstly, this is clearly a graphic designed website. This is not a website that is designed merely to communicate the information. He is trying to reach a mass audience here. This is meant to be an accessible and interesting website for the general public. This is a piece of comms that is aimed at the masses. He's put his face at the very top. Donald Trump has his face there. He didn't have to do that. That's a conscious choice on his part. It's laid out very methodically. There's a little map there making the argument about the proximal origins and the fact that it came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. He deals directly with the proximal origins publication, which is a fraudulent publication by none other than Anthony Fauci. Again, the graphic design here is lovely. There's a lot of effort that's gone into this. I have to believe that this is actually step one of something much bigger, that there is a lot more coming here. This is essentially laying a foundation and setting the scene. He's got this incredible Forbes video here in which Senator Rand Paul makes some wonderful work in that video. Now, this is whitehouse.gov/lab leak true origins of COVID. It's a horrible URL. I will put it into the show notes, though, for people that want to have a look. Anthony Cuomo in New York. This for me feels like the first salvo of something much, much, much bigger. And so I would suggest, as interesting as this website is, there's also an element of watch this space. You were talking about unfinished business. How far do you think you might be willing to go with this?
Yeah, well, look, I think it's in stark contrast to the way we're used to governments changing tack or admitting things here in Australia. It's usually on the eve of a public holiday or a sporting event or in the middle of the night, and it's always dragged out of them, either through court proceedings or, like they sort of try to use the smoke and mirrors to distract from it. And I think that you're right. This is almost certainly the start of a broader shift in policy. And look, I'm really excited about it. I think that the easiest thing in the world to do, like you said, would have been to say nothing and just let it pass. But I think it's heartening because where the US goes, so eventually does the rest of the world follow. And
Yeah.
that brings us probably to recent developments here in Victoria.
It certainly does. I mean, you mentioned being willing to admit that you were wrong, being a really good characteristic, being something that we need to see more of in politics. But someone who famously is unable to admit when they were wrong is former Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews, a man that I have no particular love for. If you haven't seen my documentary Battleground Melbourne, you can watch it for free at battlegroundmelbourne.com. I'll put that in the show notes as well, and you'll understand my history with this man and why I find him to be very unpleasant. In that documentary, I used the evidence that we had at the time to show that this curfew, this was one of a raft of measures. There were restrictions 5 kilometres from home. They locked up the playgrounds. There were 4 reasons to leave home. They arrested people for watching sunsets. They had military checkpoints and a ring of steel dividing metropolitan from rural Victoria. And they introduced a curfew. Now, Daniel Andrews insisted that these were all health measures, and he insisted, in fact, that the police had requested the curfew in order to make enforcement easier. Now, in the documentary Battleground Melbourne, I play you the audio recording of the police commissioner at the time directly refuting that the police were not consulted and they had nothing to do with it. Daniel Andrews then claimed that it was in relation to health advice. And Jordan, I believe the revelations that have come out recently would show that once again he was not being honest there.
Yeah, that's right. So in court proceedings, there's been an email discovered between the chief health officer at the time, Brett Sutton, and Dr. Romanes, who was one of the sort of public health panel people. And Dr. Romanes said that the idea of a curfew hasn't arisen from public health advice in the first instance. So that's as clear, you don't have to be a law graduate to sort of understand that that's about as clear an admission.
Don't look at me. Don't look at me. It wasn't us.
Yeah, look, it really is. And I think what people have to remember as well is that the people involved in these decisions at the time, the public servants in particular, they know that at some point this is going to be made clear and that it's going to come out. And
Sure.
I think that what we'll see as things do get released or become available through FOI or court documents or whatever, we'll see these kind of attempts to sort of preempt and protect themselves and make clear that they understood at least what was happening, no matter what the political situation was and what Daniel Andrews was insisting. So I think, look, for libertarians and for you and followers of your channel, this is validation. It's not a surprise. It's not some shock that we didn't expect. It's absolutely what we were saying all along. And I hope that people understand that, if we were right about this and we've correctly described the way government and politicians respond when they're embarrassed or they're trying to exert control or they're trying to justify something they want to bring in, like with the hate speech laws more recently, this is the way governments act. This isn't a bug. This is a feature. And if libertarians are right about this, maybe we should be listened to about other areas of policy where we can make really important change.
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree more. And full disclosure, I'm a former member of the Libertarian Party, or the now Libertarian Party, formerly Liberal Democratic Party. And even though I'm not a member anymore, I'm certainly very sympathetic to the libertarian worldview. And yes, with an election coming up, I will have to put an authorization at the end of this video, which means, Jordan, it is free reign. We might as well talk about your run. You are running for the Senate in Victoria to represent Victoria for the Libertarian Party. We have Craig Kelly running on a unity ticket in New South Wales, which is very exciting. You've also got candidates elsewhere in Australia. What we're seeing from the Liberal and Labor parties, in my opinion, is very much two wings of the same bird. I've just released a video this morning on their housing promises, their housing policy, and it just appears to be a disaster in every single direction. But let's be realistic. The Libertarians, unfortunately, along with One Nation and et cetera, are not going to form government in this election. So what are you hoping for? Why are you running? And what are you hoping to achieve through the election in the bigger picture? And then personally, if you were elected, what is it that you could actually realistically do as one senator?
No, that's right. And I think it's now in 2025 a realization that, we're not going to have this sweeping wave where things are going to change overnight. And I think a lot of people who were newer to politics and really passionate about what was happening during the COVID years, maybe hoped and expected things in 2022 that weren't realistic. But what I do know is that getting libertarian voices in the Senate is incredibly important. We've seen in the last 3 years and in the last 12 months of this term in particular, how important the Senate is, how many opportunities there often are for the Senate, not only to be pivotal in terms of deciding whether legislation moves forward or fails, but also in drawing attention to important issues, to being a voice that's actually acting before legislation comes to Parliament. Because what I've learned from my friend David Limbrick that you mentioned before is, and looking at the New South Wales and Victorian parliaments, by the time governments bring legislation to the Parliament, they've usually done the numbers and they know their pathway to victory.
Sure.
We need senators on the crossbench who aren't just going to be playing defence, who are going to be calling out issues, being proactive, getting on inquiries. Our former Senator David Leyonhjelm in 2013 and 2016, his terms did that very effectively. And I know that representatives like myself, like Craig Kelly, and like many of the other fine candidates running for the Senate will absolutely be bringing that kind of attitude. I think that libertarians understand that it's not about what happens in Parliament primarily. It's about educating the people about the system, about what's actually going on in Canberra in our name. And I think if people knew and could see more clearly just how obscene the government and the surrounding sort of periphery of government has become in Canberra in this bubble that we don't get to see, and it's very unaccountable and it's very secretive, and that's why Canberra is the way it is. It's this kind of off the grid, outside scrutiny place where it gets very comfortable, and a lot of politicians get very used to their perks and privileges. And I think that, people like Craig Kelly, he's got a very strong track record when he was an MP of, making sure he was minimising his allowances. And like we said in the previous segment about COVID, he's been proven to be right about every important issue that we've had over the last couple of years. So for myself, I've been running here in Victoria for the last 12 months. So I've been campaigning really, really hard, both because that's what's needed to win and because I want to show people what kind of an elected representative I would be. And I think it would be fair to say that if I'm elected, I'm going to be the proverbial cat amongst the pigeons in Canberra.
Well, you make a good point about things like inquiries, and what we've seen in this term of government is a handful of good senators. Unfortunately, there are no libertarian senators federally right now, but we do have some wonderful people. I'm going to name Senator Jared Rennick, Senator Alex Antic, even though he is a member of the Liberal Party, he's done some wonderful work, and Senator Malcolm Roberts are the three standouts, although Senator Ralph Babette as well, he's a newer senator, so I don't think he's quite got the ropes yet, as he's not as deep into this as what some of the others are. But what we're seeing is an enormous amount of truth-telling happening as a result of their work on things like committees and inquiries and so forth. And for accountability to happen further down the line, first we need the truth to come out. And this news that's come out as a result of this court case in Victoria is a perfect example of that. Well, Jordan, I certainly hope that the people of Victoria do send you to Canberra to represent them and to help bring out more of the truth so that in future we can see some accountability. In the meantime, Jordan, go well, and thank you so much for joining me.
No worries. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me. My name's Topher Field. This is the Topher Project, and I am 100% viewer supported. So if you would jump on to Good People Break Bad Laws, the URL is down here somewhere, goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com, and buy my books, buy my DVDs, buy my merch. There's actually lots of different designs. They're not all like this. And as well, I also have an online course, the Getting Your Head in the Game online course. Check that out while you're there as well, and you'll be supporting me and helping me to do my work. And yes, because there's an election coming, and because this was an interview with a politician who is running, just for safety's sake, so I don't fall foul of the AEC, I'm going to do an authorization. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. And as always, stay free. Authorized by Topher Field for Topher Field at Topher Field Studio.